Welcome to Conversations, where today we are talking to Maritza Davila, a growth strategist and consultant who has over a decade experience in operations, sales, and systems. She has a passion for helping business owners and their teams track KPIs to achieve their growth goals. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Dr. Kelly?
Great. I'm doing great. It's a beautiful sunny day. And interesting fun fact, we are in the same city.
Yes.
Who knew?
Small world.
Small world, small world. Well, I'm excited about this conversation around KPIs, and I would love maybe just to jump in and start. Most organizations, companies, they understand what KPIs are. But if somebody is tuning in and they're like, oh, another acronym, what is it? What does it mean? Why don't you explain a little bit about what a KPI actually is and why it's important for companies?
100%. So they're most commonly known as key performance indicators. So, the one variable that shows how well you're performing in the company. But I have also seen KPIs used as an acronym for key purpose indicator, key process indicator. So it's just basically the one variable that you can use to determine, if it's KPI for key performance, how well are you performing in the company as an employee? If it's key process indicator, it would be, this is the one variable in the process that would is going to make it or break it. Essentially, it's going to make it happen or not. And then the key purpose indicator that I've heard as well is, are we actually, there's companies like Tom's, like the shoes,
Yeah.
that if they will donate one pair of shoes, for every shoe that they sell. And so that is an indicator of their purpose, right? Because they're trying to help people that are unfortunate, economically unfortunate. And so helping them in different countries and things like that. So there's different indicators, but it is measuring very specific things. And I like to call them momentum metrics because I think that there are metrics that measure how much momentum there is in the business. Because I'm all about helping businesses grow predictably. So.
Predictably. That right
Mhm.
there, that word in itself is important, right? To
Mhm.
be predict. Yeah, I like that. I,
Yeah, a lot of people end up asking me when I say that, well, how do you make a business grow predictably? That's the, that's the next question. And I like to tell them at that point, well, nothing is predictable unless it's measurable.
Mhm.
And so we both live in Florida, so we know when a hurricane is going to come, right? They're measuring the heat of the waters, right, in the ocean. That can be, and it's forecasted from, at least a week or so
Yeah.
ahead. And so they let us know, they predict what hour it's going to hit, in Florida, what time, what category of, hurricane it would be. And so, and why is that? That's because they're able to measure, what's going on in the ocean that predicts when it'll hit. So it's the same thing with business and metrics.
And I remember I was in a class, I can't remember the name of the book, but it basically said everything can be measured. And we really have to understand that we may not be we may be thinking surface level for our businesses, for our organizations, but there are other things that can be measured as well that can help with that predictability. So I love that.
100%.
Yes, yes.
That's what I like to, I think a lot of people will measure quantitative metrics. So anything that's financial, it's just easy to see. You know how much money the business has in the bank account. You know how many employees you have. These are just they're quantitative metrics, so they're just easier to see. But there are also qualitative metrics, right, where you can measure. How would it now knowing every employee that I have in this company, would I joyfully rehire them? Like you, So that's a qualitative metric about your culture and your staff, right? And so the team that you have. And any relationship, I think you can measure, right? As an owner to the employee to the owner, right? Because sometimes we have you may think as the owner, I'm doing a great, wonderful job, but maybe the staff has a different a different opinion about that, right? Because they may not see, the time that you spend at night thinking about them, or you're concerned about, if you never tell them, right? And I see that a lot where owners will think about things a lot more than they actually state them to their team. And teams can never do a great job or never really know if they're on the same page unless there's clear communication and clear expectation, right? So I think that's why metrics are so important because if you can tell your, even like an administrative assistant, if you can tell them, in order for you to be doing a good job, I need all of my emails to be, read and answered to by 10 a.m. and I need my schedule to be planned out a month ahead. These are, while it might not be your thinking of a metric, but it is a way for that employee to know I'm doing a good job or I'm not, because these are the exact clear expectations that they need from me, right? And so I just think that metrics bring a lot of clarity amongst teams so that they know whether or not they are doing a good job or not. And the owner can, then let them know, even with just positive recognition, that, you're doing great, right?
Absolutely. Yes. So if someone is doing this weekly, so they have they've decided, and I'm sure that that's even another conversation, like how do you decide what to measure? Let's go there first. How would
Mhm.
an organization, how would a company, how would a business person decide what they should measure?
I think it is all correlated to what their goal is in the company, right? And so most of the companies that I work with, or really all of them, want to grow their business, but there might be different constraints in those businesses that don't allow them to grow. And so some companies have more of a cultural issue, right, with their people. And then other companies may just not have a marketing strategy, and don't typically measure things. So I've noticed even with companies that are doing, multi-million dollars in revenue, they typically don't measure anything weekly. And it was surprising, very surprising to me, but yes, it is like a common pattern in business owners. They don't measure anything weekly. And so I think that's one of the things that I work with business owners. That's, well, what is the goal, right? Because if we are doing a marketing plan, let's say we want to affect the culture of the company, and so we're going to host a company picnic, right? Well, what is the goal of that? Are
Hmm,
we trying to improve our company culture? How do we know that company culture has been improved? Does that mean that employees spend time with each other out of work? Does that mean that there are more collaborative in the sense that more people are working together on a specific project? Like, how do we measure, right, that the culture has improved, right? It is a qualitative, somewhat metric, but there could be things that you could see tactically of like this is this has improved or not. But if we just do a company picnic just to do a company picnic and it's not attached to any kind of goal, then you could say you did it, but did it really help you accomplish what you wanted? And so one of the companies that I worked with, she's in the interior design field, and her goal was I want my business to get over 1.2 million revenue. And she told me, I've tried to do this for a few years and I haven't been able to. And so I was said, okay, great. So how do you get your clients? How do you build them? Where do you build? And so we just got very granular on what are the things that we do that lead to this goal, right? And I remember specifically her I told her she had to reach out and try to make specific partners that would be referral partners for her business. And she would have to meet with at least one of them a week. Um, and the whole team of this just had to bill 22 hours a week, I remember. And they had to sell in furniture and things like that about $29,000 a week or something like that. No, I'm sorry, $22,500 a week. And so for quarter two, we implemented that this year. And her quarter two goal for the furniture, for the, all the things that they sold was about $290,000 that she had to sell to be on track, right? For her 1.2 million goal. And she sold $391,000. And so that there's such a correlation of having clarity with metrics of where am I in relation to my goal. And so if your goal is tied to the metric, that's how you decide, right? What are the things that I should be measuring? Because you don't want too many measurements where you don't make any decisions on anything, right? And you just have analysis paralysis when you're looking at, all these numbers. No, you want numbers that help you course correct week over week of where, am I really going to get to my goal or not?
I think that that's a trap where people feel that they have to measure so many things. And then, like you said, analysis paralysis sets in, and then they don't go anywhere. Right. But it sounds like, from what you're sharing, is that if this is something that is weekly, it's attached to that goal, there's going to be momentum. So you see every week, this is what I need to do. This is the number I'm hitting, or whatever it is. And then you continue to move on from there.
Yeah, I like to say weekly measurements turn annual goals into progress.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there is a there is a formula to progress, and I would say it's just whatever your annual goal is, divide that by a weekly metric that you track,
Mhm.
and that will equal progress because you will see, wow, I'm really not doing much, or or I'm doing
Right.
great.
And there's accountability in that. And I'm sure that that's one of the pieces that I'm sure that you help people with, is having that accountability. Would that be a correct statement?
100%. Yes, I think that every metric needs to have an owner. So one person that reports on it and, they own it. So if they are responsible, like in my prior example with the designer, um, her other designer was responsible for the billable hours. Great. Well, we're going to ask you why, the billable hours was 10 and not, 22, right? So it makes you feel responsible. There's a sense of ownership within your team, right? Which I think every business owner would love
Yeah.
when you have a team that takes ownership for their work and accountability. And if they, miss the mark, they say that was my fault and I'm going to work to correct that.
That's
And so
correct.
that's one of the ways to improve the accountability is they have to have a number that they own.
Yeah. That ownership for sure.
Hmm.
Well, what is the difference between annual targets and weekly KPIs? Because it sounds like this is important.
Yeah. Everyone in the beginning of January 1st, every business owner is very easy for them to tell me, I want to hit, I don't know, 5 million in revenue, or I want to hit 2 million, or, that number is not as hard to find. However, most of them do not think about what does that mean weekly
Mm,
and how to customize it to their own business. And so I work with them on that, but it's very simple. All they have to do is let me know how many weeks do you typically work a year? Because not everyone works
that's right.
52 weeks, right? And so, how many weeks do you typically work a year? And let's customize it. And then now let's divide that by what your annual goal is. And of course, there's weekly and then monthly targets and then quarterly targets, right? Because let's say one week you guys all went on vacation or a lot of your employees went on vacation, so obviously you're going to be low that week. But if you are able to hit at least your monthly targets, then okay, we're still on track here. And so that's why I like to, it's a weekly thing so that weekly you can course correct if there's something that was wrong or people went on vacation, you got sick, whatever the case may be. But we still need to be sure that we are on track to hit our annual targets because I know life happens, right? You know, so as long as we're making it tactical enough where every day I know, well, if I have a weekly target of, I don't know, 30 people I have to outreach to, well, then I know, okay, well, how many do I need to hit? How many do have to do today? Right? And everyone is different. Maybe you're the type of person that is better to do it all one day. And maybe there's other people that prefer to just, do a little bit each day. Whatever. As long as the target is hit, then at least it shows you and the owner you are you are hitting your metrics and you're performing well.
Yeah, and that takes commitment. Takes commit
100%.
and I think even before that commitment, it takes a readiness for somebody to say, I'm serious. This is the goal that I have. I want to hit it, and I'm going to do whatever it takes in order to do that. And not
Mm-hmm.
everybody is there all the time.
100%. And you have to get your team on board, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they have to be aware of what your goals are, because most owners don't communicate that. And so if everyone in the company knows this is our goal, there's some buy-in, right? Of, well, and this is how you help the
That's
company
right.
hit that goal, right? So you don't just think, well, I'm just,
We're in
I
it
just
together.
yeah, we're all doing it. We're all working together towards this goal. And so it really helps to bring the whole team together so that they understand they're part of the bigger picture, even though maybe sometimes they may not feel like it, but we need everyone.
That's right. Yes, yes, and yes. All right. So let's talk about some common mistakes. So, what are some common mistakes that teams make when tracking metrics, and how can they avoid them?
Yeah, so another type of metric, or another way to differentiate the metric that you are tracking is there are leading and lagging indicators. So, for example, a lagging indicator for a business would be revenue, right? Because that's the result, the output that you get. But a leading indicator would be the input. What do you do to get that sale,
Yeah.
right? So how many leads, whatever the marketing channel may be. Let's say you send direct mail. Let's say you have a mailing list. Let's say you do outreach and you just do cold outreach or warm outreach. Whatever it is you do. Most business owners I talk to don't have a specific marketing strategy. And so they are depending on word of mouth or referrals to grow their business, but word of mouth is not predictable.
Right.
So you won't
Back
know
to
how
that
many yeah.
predictability.
Yeah, it's not there's no you can measure it when you get it, but it depends on other people.
Mhm.
However, I do like to tell people that doesn't mean you can't make referrals a strong part of your business, but you have to have strategy for it. You can't just depend on someone to, oh, you did a great job. Here's a person. No, you could send out, monthly email, or you could send an incentive to your clients to say, if you send me a referral, you'll get this, but most people don't do that, right? Most people even forget to ask for referrals. So it's like, as long as there's a plan behind it, then okay, we could make referrals a strategy, but it needs to be a strategy. It needs to be something that is a process, right? That you could say, I send out this email, I offer this incentive, I get this many people a month. And then that leads to this many sales. And that sales leads to this many revenue. So most people just measure the revenue, but they don't measure the inputs or the leading indicators that actually bring the results. And so I tend to gear it a lot more to the inputs, because if we know what works,
Right. Do it
then
over and over again.
yeah,
Yeah.
predict, growing then becomes predictable once we realize what is it that works. And so when we are just depending on the word of mouth of someone else, we don't know
Hmm.
what caused them, and if you don't so that's what I'm saying, is just as long as we can measure the inputs, and we have way more control over the outputs and the results that our business actually makes if we are controlling the inputs. And so I think most people do the opposite, and they'll wait for the bookkeeper, the accountant, I've seen it many times, right? That's what they measure is when the bookkeeper or the accountant tells them you made this much, but you didn't know week over week, how am I doing, in the business. And I think when they start to measure, they get a ton of clarity of where they are in the business as the owner and the team so that they know we're doing well or not.
And then if you need to course correct, that's the time to do it.
Hmm.
Yeah, not wait till the end of the year.
Right. When you're like, and then you're disappointed because you're like, I didn't hit my target, my goal, and now I'm gonna have to think about another goal.
Oh.
Yeah, and so if you do it week over week, you have some time to fix it and say, well, we didn't do it. Should I adjust the goal, or do I need to adjust my inputs and the work ethic?
Sometimes it's just a mindset shift, right?
That too.
You got to get what's between the ears right.
That's very true. 100%.
Yeah.
And focusing on the right things, right?
Mm.
Because sometimes we don't measure what matters, and so let's measure what actually is going to impact the business and focus on that instead of, all the other stuff that is involved with it.
Right. And that's the thing, with business owners, there's always something happening, right? There's always fires to put out or whatnot. And it's like really, and I love that you work with businesses that have teams because you do want people to have that accountability, right? And to be helping you to understand the vision of where you're going, the goals that you have, and then everybody to be on board, like you said earlier, because that is how things move along.
100%. And talking to owners, like you said, it's sometimes a mindset shift. A lot of times these owners are doers because
Mm-hmm.
they've had success in their business, and so they're very used to doing
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is that needs to be done. But I really have to help them with that where I like to tell them you can't steer a ship if you're busy bailing water.
Yeah.
And so, as the owner, you are the captain and you are the one casting the vision and telling people where we're going. And so, sometimes that means, yes, maybe you are not the one that picks up the phone. And we have to now duplicate your voice and duplicate how you speak to customers. And that's a very hard thing for people to let go of because they want control.
Especially
And
founders are
100%.
mhm,
Because it's their baby, right? The
that's their
business is a
baby.
baby. It
Oh,
is their baby. They grew it from the ground up, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
so
It's hard
I
to let
understand that, but it becomes then it's more it really matters the team that you have and how do I pick the right people? How do I keep them accountable so that they do what I want them to do? And so that's why metrics is such a big thing that I preach on. I almost because, most employees, not everyone, but most employees want to do a good job. I remember I was an employee, I wanted to do a good job. And so, but a lot of times owners are very ambiguous and confusing about clarifying to us what does a good job actually look like.
That's right.
And so I could give them very specific things that I'm going to measure them on, almost like a report card, then it just becomes a lot easier for us to decipher, oh, this is what I need to do, right? So that the owner is content with my performance. And so I don't think most owners are not great at that because they haven't most times they just founded a business. They know how to do their master at their craft.
That's right.
Doesn't mean they're a master at people and how to motivate and how to keep people accountable
So
and
many times the case.
right. And so I tend to talk to them about that because owning a business has a lot to do with leadership and communication and keeping people accountable. And so when I come to them and they tell me, well, I've had no real process or way of keeping people accountable, well, I try to implement that so that they can see, okay, well, this employee is actually doing really well and this one maybe not so great. So it helps them see me how can I affect my the team and make them help me reach my goals.
So, what does some of that accountability look like? Why don't you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so you can come up with these metrics and do that, but if you don't review them, and I like to say you should review them as often as like you check your weight, like once a week. That's what that's what the trainers say, right? Once a week, so you don't get demotivated one day to another. Um, so once a week, and everyone reports on them in a weekly meeting, right? Typically, it'd be like a weekly leadership meeting. So there's a cadence to culture. And so, cadence just how often something happens, how often it occurs. So if you're if your team knows I need to report on this every week, then okay, wow, the owner, not just the owner, but everyone else is going to know whether or not I hit my number.
Yeah.
And so there's some,
Motivation there.
yeah, and so there it's like peer pressure, when you're like in high school or so if everyone else hit their number and I didn't, well, what does that say about me? So it helps to bring some accountability. And so I I like to tell them, have a weekly meeting with your leadership if it's, if it's a bigger company, and if it's just, if you have a smaller staff, then with your staff, and have them report. Everyone gets a number. Have them report on something how that they have direct ownership of and they can control. And that way you will continue to see progress in the company. And so you could measure the metrics, but if no one reports on it, it's not going to do much. And if they continue to underperform and it doesn't become an issue that you have to resolve in the meeting, then nothing will happen. They'll just continue to underperform. So I like to tell them there's like a three strike rule. So if you can underperform for 1 or 2 weeks, the second week it would be a warning. Because the first week, maybe you got sick,
Right.
maybe, you went on vacation or, whatever the case may be. But if it's 2 weeks in a row, now that's a warning, right? We're not going to do anything, but everyone knows like the second week, like this is, well, let's see what happens next week. And if it's the third week, then that is an issue that needs to be resolved within the company because I need to understand why are you not able to perform on this metric? Are there other things that are taking up your time? Do you just not want to do it? Like what is it, And so that now becomes a discussion that we need to discuss in the meeting. And that's just, that's a process and a system to help keep your staff and your team accountable.
Yeah. Now, you have a methodology that you use. I'd
Mhm.
like you to maybe to mention just a high view,
Mhm.
not giving away the farm or anything is what I'm saying. But why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about the methodology that you have created?
Yeah, so the methodology is called the GROW methodology, and it's an acronym. So it stands for guide, research, optimize, and win. And really, it's kind of the phases that I take my clients through. And so, in the very beginning, we are coming up with the things that will help guide the entire team, including the owner, on how we're going to do business. What's the goal, right? Like, what's the vision of what's the goal? Um, what are the team members that I have on here? Who am I missing? Do I have the right team members, right? So core values is another thing that I talk to about them in the beginning because I want to understand what matters. And the team needs to understand how am I supposed to behave while I'm trying to reach this goal,
Yeah.
right? And so core values comes into that. So those are some of the things in the guide phase. And then in the research phase is when we start to collect data. And so that's when we're going to collect metrics on the specific goal that we have in place, and we come up with a plan on how, with the team, how we're going to reach that goal. And so the research phase is we're collecting data, right? And so because a lot of times we make as owners, we make decisions based off our gut, but
Mm,
not based off data. And so we need the data to back up our
right.
gut. Maybe not always, right? Because I know sometimes, but we do need some data. And so we need to balance it out. And so we do that. And then in the optimize phase, we are really looking at what has happened over the past quarter, what has worked, what hasn't worked, how effective was our plan, and how can we improve it, right? And then win is okay, well, we've already improved this, we've made this the most optimal plan that it could be, right? It's the most effective, it's the best plan to fix our constraint and the one constraint we have in the business. And now we're just going to keep doing this and we're going to continue to win. So that's kind of the methodology that I have. There's a lot of different components into it because I like to say I take a 360 holistic view of the business because, finances are one part of the thing, people
Just
are
one
another
part.
part,
That's right.
but they all work together. I heard someone say that women's brains are like a ball of yarn, and so everything is connected. So you could talk about like business, your marriage, your kids, your church, whatever it is, right? It's all connected. And I think that that is how it is with the methodology that I have with my clients because you could be making so much money, but if you're really not happy with your team, that affects it.
Or if your team's
So,
not happy with you,
right, that's another part. And so it's how do I make sure that we're all on the same page and I'm doing the best to my ability to be the best leader, right? And so you need feedback, right? You need to get feedback from your team, and you could give them these metrics, but you also have a metric. So as the owner, if you're not performing, I mean, what can you expect from your staff, right? So it's, I make it a part of the whole team. And so the owner really affects how the rest of the team does. And so I'd like to tell them you need to perform. Like you better give yourself something that you're gonna hit at least 9 out of 10 times because if
set the
not, then
example.
right, you have to be the example for the company. And so if you're not invested in this, I mean, you can't expect your people to be.
That's right. Well, KPIs, Maritza, it's interesting. I love data, and I believe you. When you're talking about, sometimes you can go with your gut, and sometimes leaders do that. But to have data to back it up is solid. I mean, because the data doesn't lie. If it's
Mhm.
truth, it doesn't lie. So this has been a fantastic conversation. I love talking about, how can businesses, increase their performance, increase their revenue, whatever it is that their goal is through doing these steps, right? And it sounds like that you're able to, as a consultant, lead a company through what they need, taking that 360 holistic approach in order to help businesses. So I appreciate you so much. I would love to give you the last word here. So what say you?
Yeah, well, I would love to, any of your listeners, if they are unclear as to how can I grow my business predictably and they would like a free consultation, I'm happy to offer that to your listeners. They would just have to go to www.businessclarity.co and they can book a free call with me. And, that's something I'd love to offer to them.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And until next time, you keep doing great things, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly.
Bye-bye.
Stay tuned for the after show.
It does do something.
It is. It is. And it's one of those things. Leaders get busy, and they're not always focused on some of those areas that need to be focused on, and bringing the team in to help with that, because leaders are not an island. We need people around us who we can trust with these things. So no, great information
That's awesome.
for
Thank you.
sure. Yeah.
And I mean, I like to say, like, I mean, nothing big will ever happen without a team. Like every big,
Mhm.
everything, not even companies, everything. You need a big team behind it in order to make big things happen.
Right.
Um, so in my brain, the main problem that I solve is inefficiency.
Mhm.
And it's funny that you said, they're just, they're putting out all these fires. And I said, yes. And the reason that's their problem is because they're so distracted,
Yeah.
because they have so many things to, you know, that can take their attention away. And so I think that my solution, or the way I solve with my methodology, is prioritization. Because I'm like, there's always going to be fires. There's no business that's perfect and has like no problems. And so I tell them like, some fires are just like a fire in a trash can outside the building,
And
and you don't really have to pay attention
leave
to
it
it.
alone.
Yeah. But there's other fires that will like burn down the building. So let's pay attention to those. And so, yeah, I just think that they don't typically, as owner, like we don't focus on what really is like going to move the needle forward and really matters. Like, what are the results? Because if not, we're just doing like things that take away our attention and don't really like admin work or
Mhm.
emails. Emails are just everybody else's to-do list with you, most of the time. And so, I don't know. I try to get them a little bit focused on that, but it takes some time because you're going from
Absolutely.
being a doer to like being a leader. So
And there's a
definitely.
difference there. There's a difference. And I really appreciate um, how you have that and you talk about that weekly cadence and the weekly meetings and having that accountability because all those things matter and they
Hmm.
matter in such a way that if you want that needle to be moved, it's going to take some of those things. And sometimes those are hard to get people on board. Change can be hard.
Change is difficult, but it's,
Mhm.
the only permanent thing in life, right? So it's
Right.
gonna thing
Always.
life's always gonna change. But yeah, and I think that for some of my clients, um if I'm not involved like after the quarter or anything like that, a lot of times they go back to their old habits.
Yes.
And so even like having an outsider come in and keep them accountable to whatever plan they decided really helps, because it's like, as the owner, you don't have anyone to hold you accountable. So if you have an outsider come in and say, well, what's going on? Like this, what happened the past month that I didn't see you?
Yeah.
Your metric was not hit. And so I think it helps them to
It sure
stay accountable.
does. Sure does.
Yeah.
And that's, adding that to a contract, that aftercare, if you will, for the company, for
Hmm.
the team, for whatever, whoever you're working with is really important.
Yeah, 100%. And I
Until
mean,
they
I've had,
that cadence of, this is just what we're doing and this is how we do it. This is why we do it. And when it's embedded and then it becomes the culture. So if it's
right,
culture, they're going to do it.
right. And so that's why like the cadence to me is culture. How
Mhm.
often something is looked at, how consistent are we with these things? But yes, there's like a transitional period between, okay,
Yes.
this is new information. We're going to apply this information. Um, it almost takes a few weeks sometimes, where I've had clients they'll tell me, well, you bring up a lot of good questions, but it takes them a little bit to accept it
Mhm.
and say, okay, maybe I shouldn't, do this, and, decide, okay, maybe I should try to delegate, but it's a like an internal conflict within them.
Delegation can be very difficult for people.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And I think that a lot of times people abdicate instead of delegate.
Mm-hmm.
And so like they just don't like doing it. And it's like, here, take it. But like they never like follow up, or they know, there's no like the accountability, right? They're never told like what happens with it, or follow up with them, or see. And so then at the end of the year, or whatever it was they were taking care of, it's like, oh, this didn't happen, or
Yeah,
it didn't work well, or now we owe a bunch of money, or whatever the thing is. And it's like, well, I mean, did you delegate well? I think it sounds
that's
like you
right. There's a
abdicated.
difference.
Yeah, but there's so much to learn. I mean, about leadership, motivating people with teams, and
Okay.
it's really hard to be a business owner and learn all these things from scratch and just have to get really good at them. So many different skill sets. So I understand that
Yes.
as well.